Hello, everyone. This is the part 4 video for period 3, reviewing 1750 to 1900. This is going to be European American imperialism, uh, and we covered the motives and the means in the last video. But again, the motives of the Europeans, the United States, primary motive is cheap resources for their factories, for the Industrial Revolution, and then a place to sell finished products. That's the number one motive. So let's move forward. The big areas, and we'll cover quickly today. The British colonized India, and that's South Asia, so that goes way back into the 1600s. But then their colony builds, and basically by 1750, they are making it an official colony. And by 1850, the British government takes over completely from the British East India Company. And I'll be talking more about that when we get to India. Briefly, the French grab Vietnam, Indochina around 1850, and hold on to that until basically the mid 1900s. The Dutch were in the Indonesia area starting to take over in 1600, and they only grow and turn Indonesia into a full-blown colony by 1800. All right, moving on. Africa, in the late 1800s, starting like 1870, I think, is the voice cracked, is the scramble for Africa, where European countries are basically carving up all of Africa and seizing it finally. They didn't grab Africa earlier before the Industrial Revolution because they didn't have the medicine or the guns really to conquer Africa yet, because Africans had tropical diseases that killed Europeans that went inland, and also Africans or the Europeans, the Africans had iron weapons, and so that hurt them as well. Hold on, gotta plug in my computer. Africans had iron weapons, so it basically took until the Europeans had better guns like machine guns and breech loading rifles that I talked about in the last video to conquer Africa. Oh, why didn't I wait for this slide? Ooh. Anyway, here we go. India's key date, 1600s. British starts getting outposts. 1700s, turning India into a colony. Mid 1800s, direct control. There's rebellions all over the place, all over the world. When the Europeans come, try to control people. Obviously, no one's happy about that. And the Indians have a big rebellion, 1857, known as the Sepoy Mutiny. And this is when the Indian Army, the Indians fighting for the British, started the rebellion because the gun cartridges were smeared supposedly with pig fat and cow fat, which upset the Muslims and the Hindu soldiers. The British did a lot to exploit India. Basically, the goal was to sell British fabrics and other factory-made textiles in India, to kill the Indians' own textile industry and other industries, and also then to tax the Indians so they get money out of taxing them, and also encouraging the Indians to grow cash crops so that when there were famines or there were food shortages, they would be much worse because everyone's busy growing cash crops rather than food crops. Moving on. This will probably show up a couple times in this PowerPoint, but the bottom line is when slavery is phased out in the 1800s, they need a new cheap labor force for sugar plantations and other places around the British Empire and namely the British Empire. But so what do? They get Indians to leave India to go places like Fiji and South Africa, and Chinese to go places like the United States, all on these indentured servant contracts. So there's a whole new migration that starts in the 1800s. Australia and New Zealand, these are settler colonies for the British in the 1800s, and also convict. They took convicts to Australia. Here's your scramble for Africa slide. Late 1800s, Europeans are scrambling for Africa and carving it up. And they have a conference in Berlin, and it's called the Berlin Conference. And they invited exactly 0 Africans to, say how they'd like their continent to be divided up. It was all about doing what's best for the Europeans. God bless Europe. So, King Leopold in the late 1800s. This slide doesn't really do the topic justice, but you'll recall he turned the Belgian Congo into a forced labor colony where he would use his troops, the force publique, to force other Africans to harvest rubber. They would chain up the women, force the men out into the forest, and people that resisted were killed, whipped, had hands cut off to save bullets, all kinds of horrible stuff. This caused a huge disruption to the Congo with a lot of famines and things like that while everyone's forced into rubber production. South Africa is another key colonial spot in Africa. This was a place that was colonized early, one of the few before the scramble for Africa. Partially because it was the tip of Africa where traders are passing by naturally. So by the 1800s, it's a British colony. There's Dutch there as well, and there's different things that happen there. But the main thing is that gold and diamond are discovered in the late 1800s, and this becomes basically South Africa, a huge resource provider of gold and diamonds. They're a mining center. And this is going to cause male labor migration to the mining centers, and the women having to take over roles at home. This will be a highly segregated situation in South Africa where only the men are allowed to migrate to the mines, and that they must return directly home when they're done with their work. And this sets up South Africa for the horrible apartheid system in the 1900s, which is not on the AP test this year. Too bad. It's a good story to learn. There's all kinds of resistance to European colonial rule. The Zulus resist. Good job, Zulus. There's religious movements, like the Hosa cattle killing movement, hoping that if they killed their cattle, they would get the Europeans to leave. In America, we also are doing some imperialism, and if you weren't aware, expanding westward, there were apparently some people living there before the Europeans arrived and took the land from them. There's also indentured servants. There's a lot of migration of Europeans to the United States. In the 1700s, still indentured servants coming. Also just free labor migration, people wanting a new life in the United States. And then we also have these indentured servant, mainly Chinese migrants in the late 1800s that helped build the railroads. And then we have laws. We're like, no, too many Chinese people. They're undercutting our wages. And so then we ban that. God bless America. Trump would have loved those guys. And then there's resistance to expansion in the United States as well. Like the Cherokee Nation tried to stop westward expansion into their lands. We also have religious movements in the United States, like the Ghost Dance music movement. Again, a religious practice to hopefully drive the Europeans away. Here we go. Free European labor migration all over North and South America. Some were indentured. Australia and New Zealand have more settler migration, and I covered this before, and convict migration. Here's more details about indentured servitude. And we're done. That's it. That's all the review videos for the AP test. Woo! Can't say I'm sad.